Hello, and welcome to this second video that is all about rivers. If you haven't seen the first part, I would suggest to watch that one first. My name is Edwin. I'm a fantasy map maker with a background in geography, and I plan to make a lot of these videos. And today is again about rivers because they always cause a lot of discussion wherever you go, on Facebook, on Reddit, on Discord, wherever you post a map, the first thing people would reply on and respond on is the rivers. Um, and it got me wondering why that is. Like, why are rivers so important to people? I have made over 300 maps and all as commissions. And when people give me descriptions or sketches of the world or the continent they want mapped, they almost never say anything about rivers. Like, mountain ranges is for a lot of people important, like where are the big mountains, or a desert, something like that. Like Arctic regions are relevant, like half the people have a clear idea of where they would want those kind of regions. City placements is for quite some people important, but then mostly about like the capital cities or the starting location of an adventure. But rivers, not really. Maybe there's one big river, like, or something like this city needs to be on a river, but that's about it. And still, if nobody finds it really important and I get all the freedom to place them wherever I feel they belong, then why is it that so many people react heavily on river placement? I really don't know. And I think it strengthens my point that when it comes to rivers, it's just good enough to stick to the basic guidelines. The general rules, don't go crazy. If you just make them as I described in part one video, like from high to low, not too exciting, not too epic. You can have one Nile on your continent, one special river that is really good for a great adventure. But besides that, don't try and do anything crazy with them. Nobody really cares about rivers. But then again, to have those general guidelines, of course, you need to know what they are. I explained them a little bit in the first part, and in the second part, I will go through some of my own maps to show you how rivers can be done. And the first map I want to go through, you already see on screen, is Britain and Ireland. It's one of the first maps I ever made, and it was a bit of a test for myself as well. And I can recommend everybody, like, if you want to learn about geography, just pick a spot on Earth that you like, that you're interested in, and kind of copy it. Like, Google information, where are mountains, where are the rivers, where are the forests, and everything. That way you get a feel of how things can be realistically. I did that for this map. At that time, when I just started mapping in Wonderdraft, I didn't know yet how to import a map. So I actually drew this myself with the trace tool, which took a long time, and it can also be the reason that some things are not precisely the way they are in real, but more or less they are, and it's not about the details. By the way, if you would want to try out on real world maps, I already have a lot of templates that I imported, that I prepared with black and white images to import in Wonderdraft. And I have them available, and some are available on my website, fantasymapshop.com, and there will be more available for Wonderdraft Academy members, on which you can find more on my website as well. Okay, when we got this, I will turn off the labels because they're not so relevant for it. And when I turn off the symbols as well, you can see the rivers in Britain. I didn't do every single small stream. They're mostly the bigger, the more major rivers. And the first thing you can see is that they are not epic. They are not very long. They are not super special. Most of them just start somewhere and they go to the nearest point of the ocean. like everything you can expect here. Some hills, which there are. They start in hills or mountains and they just go to the ocean. Some are a little longer, like the Thames, which you can also see is a bit wider that way. Like the longer a river is, usually the wider they are, because there's more chance that they receive a lot of water on the way to the ocean. But it's nothing spectacular really. And then in Scotland there are the Highlands, and it just all the rivers go away from the central mountains to the ocean. And maybe you remember from part one that I said that rivers don't go across from one sea to another sea. And then you might wonder why it is that this one does. That's because this is an artificial canal, which was built in the 19th century, the Caledonian Canal, and it's not a natural thing. So this it has like locks to get ships through. And if in your setting the technology is advanced enough for such things, then of course you can do that. But in a natural situation, this wouldn't occur. So now we have like kind of a basis. Like we know nothing special happens. They go from mountains to the ocean. They don't cross continents, and there is no river starting in Scotland going all the way south and ending in southern England. Those things usually don't happen. So with that, I would like to go to a second map, which is here called Kemet. It's a map of Egypt, mostly ancient Egypt, but geography-wise, not that much changed. I see that I have turned on a lot of asset packs, which is the cause of this taking some time. I really have to sort out a bit more to not have to load them all every time, because it makes your map slow and easier to crash, and that's not something you want. So this is real world Egypt. Again, it is imported, but then you have the landmass. Mountains and other things are not one-on-one accurate, but they are more or less accurate. Of course, we all know the Nile, which I always call the special case, that you can have one on your continent or in your world, or maybe two, but don't overdo it. Not every river is a Nile. And it starts like not in the desert, but it starts way south in the southern parts of Africa, where there is more rainfall, and that's why there is such a big river in the desert, but it doesn't start in the desert itself. Big question is, why is this a desert? I mean, there is a sea, the Mediterranean Sea in the north, and we have the Red Sea in the east. So sea on two sides. Does that then mean that the wind doesn't come from either north nor east? No, that's not really the case. First of all, the wind does absolutely not come from the Red Sea. There's barely any wind, barely any rain coming from this side. So your first reaction could be like this mountain range on the east side would block a lot of clouds and rain to prevent it from going ahead inland. That's not the case. There's no rain coming at all from this side. I still did a little bit of green on the coast, but that's more for this setting to get a bit more variety. In real, this is just dry, and also you can see no rivers at all on this side, because there is simply no rain coming from this side. There are some small streams from here, but that's really nothing special, and yeah, barely worth mentioning as a river. In the north, there is a little bit of fertile strip. It's the colder area of Egypt. There is some rain, especially in the winter months, but still, the wind actually does come from the north. So it is quite surprising that we can have a desert here. And this is also one of those things that you don't have to be able to explain every single geography thing in your world. Sometimes there are strange things happening, like which is the case here. The wind from the north, from the sea, is kind of fighting with the dry air from the Sahara, from the desert. So there's a battle going on in the air. And on top of that, it's mostly dry air, which is coming from very high up and which is descending around here. And that very high and dry air, there is no rain coming from it. We would call that it's kind of on the edge of a Hadley cell, but it's not really relevant to go too deep into that. There are a few more points on Earth where you would see the same thing in South America or in South Africa, the Kalahari Desert. But for now, that's not really the relevant thing. It's at least good to know that it can be that there's wind coming from a sea and still you have a desert right next to the sea, which is the case for whole North Africa. So what this basically says is that there can be a river in the desert, there can be a desert next to the sea, as long as you are able to explain at least a little bit why things are as they are, then that's all fine. And from this Egypt map, I want to go to the third and last map, which is completely fictional. I made it initially as a commission, but after that altered it also for my own use because I liked the setting. It's different from the standard fantasy world, I think, with continents in the corners, but that the central point is not your biggest landmass or a continent, but it's coming from the corners into the world, and I kind of liked it. Well, let's go just through the map continent by continent, and let's start in the northwest, which is the special case. It's the ravaged lands, which already implies that it's not standard. I mean, I will turn off the symbols and the labels here. You can see there are no rivers here because it's a wasteland. There is nothing left, no civilization whatsoever. There's only a jungle here with some rivers and a few small rivers on the side. The last bit that is not part of the wasteland yet. So let's not take this continent as an example of how geography is supposed to be. This is the more common continent. Several kingdoms, has a bit of everything. And when we turn it off again, you can see it's a bit more like Britain. There's this small river. They start somewhere, they go towards the ocean. They start in the center. Usually that will be some mountain areas. Here is a small mountain range, and you can see rivers starting in it going to the sea. There's one bigger river, which, well, you can say it's the Nile of this continent, although that's maybe a bit too much for this one, which starts here and then passes a few lakes and ends up here. This is mostly because this part, this kind of land bridge between two continents, plays like a very important role in the setting. It's a trade hub and the battleground for the two continents. So I wanted to give them some fresh water so that they have a reason to make it even extra important. And also it can give a lot of trade coming from those rivers going to the big civilized area here. So as you can see, nothing that special. Things start in the mountains and go to the ocean, and in the middle there's a little less, like there's an area without rivers because it's being blocked by the mountains. So you have a bit drier center here, and the forests, the fertile lands, are more on the sides, on the edges of the continent. For this one, the northern part is kind of similar to that. When we turn it off again, you can see a lot of the small rivers again, same as Britain, same as the other continent in the west. There's one here a little bit longer, can be a bit more important to a story. And then there's this big inland sea, or it's more like a giant lake, I think. I called it a lake because it's the kingdom of the lake with cities and towns all around the lake or on the islands inside it. It's the longer one. It has several inlets and it goes all the way here. So that is kind of the Nile of this continent. It starts up north and it crosses most of the continent to the east. But besides that big one and this relatively big one, they are all quite boring. And of course, in the south, there's this desert. In the biggest part of the desert, there's no river at all. There's a little bit of trees, but you can see I colored them less green to make sure that people understand that they are not like this lush green forests. There's just some strip of land with some city-states along the coast. Here, that's a little bit of a strange thing, this half-circle mountain range. It was originally the idea of the commissioner he wanted it kind of like this, and I decided not to change it because I somehow, although like the shape geographically, I can't really explain it, but I kind of liked it. And then, of course, you can come up with a story for it. It's also not completely crazy, so I didn't mind it so much. The biggest question here would be like, why is there water coming from these mountains? So apparently rain can reach the mountains, but the rain doesn't drop down in the central land. But then maybe the mountains are so high there is like snow on top of it in winter, whatever. Doesn't really matter that much. I like the idea, and then if you like it, then you can always implement it as long as it's not completely 100% impossible. Then from this one, you can also see here, like this mountain range kind of blocks things. Some small streams in the north, but here is, yeah, something happened over here, and maybe meteors hit, or maybe it was some magic impact. Doesn't really matter, but it kind of hurt the lands, and then no rivers here. There's not much life here, and I don't know yet what or who lives here, but I can tell you they're not the friendly type of people. And then we go to the east, to the northeast. There's this colder continent with this thing attached to it. Let's start with the colder one, because that's the more natural one. Again, it starts in the mountains. We have a big mountain range in the north. The wind coming from the south, the west, and the east, but not from the north, so there are no rivers in the north. Can also be that it's just so cold that it's constantly frozen. But in this case, it's also a dry, cold land. The river is starting in those mountains and going southwards. There's a bit of mountain here, which you can see as the start of several small rivers as well. Nothing special again. Like Britain, it's no epic river system, it's just normal. This is a bit the crazy one. It's dry land, and well, you can already like the name, the Vinatari Wastes, and it has this Jagger's Gorge, several like oases or ponds or lakes, whatever you want to call them. In the south, there's this bigger lake. This is still kind of normal with inlets and an outlet, and there's some fresh water coming from here. But the exact reason why there is no fresh water, no rivers here, is not necessarily geographically, but there is something going on here as well. I mean, it would be a bit strange to think that there's no wind coming from the west, no wind coming from this strait, and from the east also not so much. Like, why is it dry? It does have a bit of the position that it could be going on here, not on here. But then again, on top of the being dry by itself, there's also more stuff going on here. And as you notice, there are quite some parts where I now say like, yeah, okay, geographically, maybe it doesn't make the most sense. But then I get back to the Egypt part, which I would also say geographically, maybe it doesn't make the most sense. Why is it a desert when the wind is coming from the Mediterranean, from the north? But still it is, because there's this special thing, this Hadley cell. And then as long as you don't do the impossible things like a river going from one ocean to the next, unless it's this artificial canal, as long as you don't do those impossible things, then it usually is fine. And I think the biggest mistake you can make is to overthink it. Like just stick to these general points, the things that really are not possible in real. Don't do it. Don't give people reason to discuss your rivers. Like if rivers are not important, if you don't have any story with it, if it's just there because you are world building and in a world there are rivers, so you want to add rivers, then don't go crazy, don't do anything special, and don't feed the river police. That's my lesson for today, and that's also the end of this video. I'm not sure yet what the topic of the next one will be. If you have any specific requests, you can put them in the comments, um, and maybe I will go into that for the next video. Thank you for watching.